the constitutional provisions on revisions and amendments can be found in sections 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Article 17 of the 1987 Constitution. And Section 1 states that any amendment to or revision of this Constitution may be proposed by the Congress upon a vote of three-fourths of all its members or by a constitutional convention. Okay, that is the wording of Section 1. Okay. And because of that, revision and amendment are changes in the Constitution. No? So, how do we introduce changes in the Constitution? It is by amendment or by revision. What does amendment or revision mean? Revision is the rewriting or overhauling of the entire instrument itself. Okay, and amendment is a change or alteration, no, of provisions of the Constitution. Okay, but still within the lines of the original instrument, okay, which necessarily would now probably improve the Constitution or to introduce certain changes that are necessary in order to address a particular issue at the time when the particular amendment was introduced. Okay, so amendment is small changes in the Constitution, while revision is probably the whole Constitution is rewritten and revised. So again, no, you cannot interchange these terms. Amendment is different from revision. Now there are certain procedures, no, on how amendments are made. So remember that in the end, it is the people who would decide whether there will be changes in the Constitution. Okay, but who proposes amendments? Okay, so the proposal is done either by Congress, by a constitutional convention, or through a people's initiative. So there are three ways by which amendments can be proposed. No? Ito, sinasabi natin, proposed lang siya. Okay? And then in the end, the second part of the proposal after it has been proposed is the ratification. So it is the approval of the people. It is the direct action of the people to approve or disapprove of the amendments. And this is also true with revision. Okay? So amendments can be done by these three bodies, while revisions, on the other hand, okay, the proposal for a revision can be done by Congress upon a vote of three-fourths of all its members and by a constitutional convention. But if you look at this, the people's initiative is not present in revisions. Okay, so people's initiative can only introduce amendments and but not revisions. But similar, either it be amendment or revision, it requires ratification. Okay. So if, well, at the onset, no, you must remember that initiatives for proposals for amendments to the Constitution, even if it says Constitutional Convention, it still arises from Congress. Manggagaling at manggagaling pa rin siya sa Kongreso, because it is Congress who will decide whether they would constitute themselves as a constituent assembly to amend or revise the Constitution, or allow for the creation of a constitutional convention who will be in charge of revising or making proposals for the revision or amendments of the Constitution. Because if it is by constitutional convention, Congress, okay, may call. So, manggagaling sa Congress. The call shall come from Congress for the creation of a constitutional convention. By how many votes? By a vote of two-thirds of all its members. So if we refer back to the definitions or the procedures, no, we have here a three-fourths vote. Bakit? What's the difference between the three-fourths vote and for its two-thirds vote? No, the three-fourths vote is to what? Uh, Submission of a proposal or a revision. Okay, which requires three-fourths vote. On the other hand, okay, for the creation or for the call of a constitutional convention, what is required is a two-thirds vote. Okay. The constitutional convention is actually the appointment of members, no, coming from the different sectors of our society, okay, who shall be responsible for revising or proposing revisions or amendments to the Constitution. Okay. But again, to call for a constitutional convention, you need a two-thirds vote of all its members versus yung three-fourths vote in order to pass a proposal for amendment or revision. So, three-fourths. If there are 200 members, okay, in a in Congress, for example, no, what would constitute three-fourths of that? Okay, if there are 200 congressmen in the lower house, merely an example, no, if there are 200 congressmen, how many votes are required in order to comply with the required three-fourths vote? So about 150 votes. Okay. While two-thirds, on the other hand, no, you divide 200 by 3 and multiply it by 2. If there is a fraction, plus 1. Okay. And then the second one, if by constitutional convention, is to submit to the electorate the question of calling such a body by a majority vote of all its members. So, Congress may call for a constitutional convention. So, they will now directly call for a constitutional convention. Or, okay, this is an alternative for Congress to do. Okay? It is to what? Submit it to the people whether there will be a constitutional convention. Okay? And how is this done? By a majority vote of all its members. So it would now be the people to decide whether they should create a convention for the revision or amendment of the Constitution. This is found, of course, under Section 3, Article 17 of the Constitution. Okay, so you can see here, no, the different voting numbers that are required for to allow amendments or revisions to the Constitution. But whatever the acts of these bodies, okay, whatever the acts of these bodies, either it be by Congress or by the Constitutional Convention or by what do you call this? By people's initiative, whatever proposals that are passed in these three bodies, it is required that it still be ratified. It is presented to the people for their approval or disapproval by a plebiscite. Okay, by a plebiscite. Now, proposal of amendments by people's initiative naman. Okay? What is a people's initiative? It is the power of the people to directly propose amendments to the Constitution or to propose amendments through an election called for that purpose. Okay? This is under Section 3A of Republic Act number 6735, which which talks of amendments and the revisions of the Constitution. Okay, because under Section 2 of the Constitution, the second paragraph states that the Congress shall provide for the implementation of the exercise of this right. So that is in compliance with the statement of the Constitution as regards the provision of implementation of the exercise of such right. So under 6735, this is the requirements under the law that calls or that is in compliance with the constitutional provision, no, for people's initiative. There are three systems of initiative. We have the initiative on the Constitution, initiative on statutes, and initiative on local legislation. So initiatives on the Constitution, as it states, no, refers to petitions proposing for amendments to the Constitution. Okay, amendments to the Constitution. While initiatives on statutes refer to petitions for the enactment of national legislation. Okay, enactment of national legislation. So for Congress to make laws. Okay, so they will propose a particular law for the passage by Congress. And then we have an initiative on local legislation. It refers to a petition proposing to enact a regional, provincial, city, or municipal or barangay law, resolution, or ordinance. So these are direct actions of the people. One is for the introduction of amendments to the Constitution. Two is for the enactment of laws. The third one is for the enactment of local legislation. Now, when we speak of local legislation, we speak of resolutions and ordinances. Strictly speaking, despite the fact that they are referred to as local legislative bodies, what the local legislative bodies are making are not strictly laws. They are merely resolutions and ordinances, but they have the force and effect of laws. Because strictly speaking, laws are passed by Congress. Okay? It is the legislative arm of the government which makes laws. Local legislation refers to the Sangguniang Barangay, the Sangguniang Bayan, the Sangguniang Panglungsod, and the Sangguniang Panlalawigan, the local Sanggunians. But of course, in our discussion, we are speaking on initiatives on the Constitution. What are the requirements for a people's initiative to pass? Okay, there must be a written petition. Okay, which specifically identifies, no, the intended amendment to the Constitution. Now, the petition must have at least 12% of the total number of registered voters or signatories. So 12% is quite a high number. In the Philippines, our population currently is about more than 110 million. Okay, 110 million peoples. And probably, I'm not sure, but probably the number of registered voters, let us say, is that there are 50 million registered voters. So how do we get the 12%? We multiply the registered number of voters, 50 million, by 12%, by 0.12. So we need 6 million signatures for the People's Initiative to pass. Okay? But there is still another requirement. Of the 12%, at least every legislative district must be represented by 3% of the registered voters therein. What does this imply, no? Or what does it mean? Well, you should understand that there are legislative districts within a particular province. Okay. Benguet, for example, is one legislative district. That's why they have only one congressman. And Baguio, for example, is also a single legislative district. And we have, let's say, Pangasinan. How many legislative districts are there? Let us say I think there are more than three, okay, legislative districts in Pangasinan. So they have more than about three congressmen also in that particular legislative district. Now, in each legislative district, at least 3% of the registered voters must have signed the petition. So every province must be represented by at least 3% of its population in the petition. And that's a very high and tall order, no, to comply with. Okay, imagine going to all the provinces seeking or ensuring that at least 3% of its total registered voters have agreed to sign the petition. Okay. And what are some of the limitations on the exercise of the right of people's initiative? Okay. The power of initiative shall be exercised 5 years after the ratification of the 1987 Constitution. So, has that passed? Okay, yes. We can now introduce amendments to the Constitution by initiative because it has been more than 5 years since the ratification of the 1987 Constitution. And the second limitation to the exercise of such right is that the power may be exercised only 1 year every 5 years thereafter. Okay. To date, no, during the earlier times of the 1987 Constitution, there were attempts for a people's initiative to amend the Constitution, but which have all failed because it failed to comply with the necessary requirement as to the number of signatures to the petition. Okay. Well, initiatives, referendum, and the COMELEC. The COMELEC shall call and supervise the conduct of initiative or referendum. Why the COMELEC? Well, the Commission on Elections is identified under Section 4 of Article 17 in the last paragraph of Section 4, which says any amendments under Section 2 hereof shall be valid when ratified by a majority of the votes cast in a plebiscite, which shall be held not earlier than 60 days nor later than 90 days after the certification by the Commission on Elections of the sufficiency of the petition. So there is an identification of the role of the COMELEC as regards the conduct of plebiscites under the Constitution. Okay, and because what is the requirement for amendments or the requirement for a what they call this, a people's initiative, identifies registered voters. Who has the list of the registered voters? Okay, it is of course the COMELEC. Okay, so we make a distinction as to revision and as to amendment. Revision, as I've said, implies a change that alters a basic principle in the Constitution. Okay, like altering the principles of separation of powers of the systems of checks and balances, or where the change alters the substantial entirety of the Constitution, as when the changes affect substantive provisions of the Constitution. Like what happened in the 1973 Constitution, no? There was an alteration of the basic principles underlying the Constitution. Why? Because under the 1935 Constitution, Congress is a bicameral institution. Okay, there is a upper house and a lower house. Under the 1973 Constitution, the National Assembly consists of only one house. That's why it's called a unicameral legislative body. Okay? And what is the purpose of a lower house and an upper house? It is for the purpose of checks and balances also. Okay? Now, uh, because of that substantial change, it cannot be done by a mere amendment. Because an amendment, as it says here in the distinction, broadly refers to a change that adds, reduces, or deletes without altering the basic principles involved. Okay? So, revision, okay, these are the changes that are introduced are quite large, or many, or substantive. An amendment, on the other hand, okay, is small. Okay, it usually pertains to a certain provision only. In revision, generally affects several provisions of the Constitution. In other words, pang marami ang mga changes. Because when you alter, for example, the structure of the legislative body from a unicameral to a from bicameral to a unicameral one, there are many changes that has to be made in the Constitution. Not only one provision na sasabihin that would say that let us make it unicameral. Okay, and that's why when we returned to the bicameral structure of Congress, no, it was introduced under a new constitution, under the 1987 Constitution. Then we have, of course, the amendment. Okay, general affects only the specific provision being amended. These are the distinction, no, that has been in our jurisprudence in the case of Lambino versus Comelec, okay, 2006 case. Now, there are tests to determine whether a proposal is a revision or an amendment. We have a quantitative test and a qualitative test. A quantitative test asks the question, no, how extensive, okay, are the changes that are being introduced, okay, that would it change a substantial, no, would it change the Constitution substantially? Okay. If the answer is yes, then it is a revision. If the answer is no, then it is an amendment. Similarly with qualitative, no, is whether the change will accomplish far-reaching changes in the nature of our government. Okay. So, in quantitative, how many number of provisions are being changed? In qualitative, it is the extent of the changes. Okay. If there are a lot of provisions under the quantitative test, then it is a revision and not merely an amendment. Kung isa lang by the quantitative test, then it is an amendment. Qualitative naman, even if the changes are few, but its effect is substantial and far-reaching, then, no, then it is a revision. But if the amendments may those changes that are introduced may affect several provisions, but the effect is not far-reaching, then it may fall under an amendment and not a revision. So there you have it, no? So that is the difference between revisions and amendments. Going back to a plebiscite, no? The plebiscite is the electoral process by which an initiative on the Constitution is approved or rejected to the people. It is for the purpose of ratifying the amendments or revisions. In my lifetime, I was aware, no, in 1986 of the plebiscite that was held in order to ratify the 1987 Constitution. Okay. So again, those are the differences between an amendment and a revision. Okay.